In the autumn of 1898, 3 workers were paid in advance to break through a wall in the back of a counting house on Bornheimer Landstrasse in Frankfurt. They were not local men. They came from Mainz, arrived separately, were housed in different parts of the property, and were each told by the architect who hired them that the work they were being paid to do was a private matter of estate management. They were told not to discuss it with each other before, during, or after the job was complete. They were paid in gold coin, not paper. 3 times the going rate for demolition work. The wall they were hired to open had been sealed for at least 60 years. Behind it was a room that did not appear on any architectural drawing of the property ever filed with the Frankfurt Municipal Authority. Inside that room, when the plaster dust settled and the lanterns were brought forward, were 47 wooden crates, a long iron chest bound with 3 different metals, and a folded map larger than the floor of the chamber itself. 2 of the 3 workers signed a brief affidavit before a notary in the weeks that followed. Both men were dead within 13 months. The contents of that sealed room have never been officially catalogued by any museum, any archive, or any government anywhere in the world. Before we go any further, if suppressed history and buried records are what you came here for, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. This channel exists to pull the threads that the official record has been cutting for 200 years. It costs you nothing. And every video we make is another thread they cannot put back. Now let us return to Frankfurt in 1898. The building on Bornheimer Landstrasse belonged to the Frankfurt branch of the Rothschild family. The name will be familiar to anyone who has spent time with 19th-century European financial history. The Frankfurt house was the original house. The one Mayor Amschel Rothschild had built out of nothing in the narrow lanes of the Frankfurt Judengasse in the second half of the 18th century. The house that had financed Napoleon's enemies and Napoleon's allies, sometimes simultaneously. The house that had moved money across European borders faster than any government of the period could track or tax it. The house from which 5 sons had been dispatched to 5 cities to build what became the most powerful private banking network in the history of European finance. By 1898, the Frankfurt branch was dying. Mayor Karl, the last active partner of the Frankfurt house, had died in 1886. His brother Wilhelm Karl was still alive, but aged, in poor health, and by every surviving account deeply preoccupied with something that had nothing to do with banking. He had spent the last years of his life giving away money, destroying correspondence, burning account books in his own study with the windows closed and the curtains drawn. His physician, a man named Dr. Stiebel, recorded in his private notes that Wilhelm Karl had told him he was preparing to meet his maker and did not wish to carry certain knowledge across the threshold. He did not specify what knowledge. In the late summer of 1898, Wilhelm Karl summoned an architect named Friedrich Pauli to the counting house. Pauli was given a single instruction. He was to walk the building carefully, measure exterior dimensions against interior dimensions, and determine whether anything lay behind the original eastern wall, the wall that had stood when the family first occupied the property in the early 19th century. Pauli walked the building for 2 days. He found a discrepancy of approximately 4.5 meters along the eastern face. There was a room there. It had been bricked over, plastered, papered, and forgotten by everyone except the man who had ordered it sealed in the first place. That man, according to the surviving correspondence that Pauli later described in his private papers, was Amschel Mayer Rothschild, the eldest of the 5 brothers, the one who had stayed in Frankfurt while his siblings built their houses in London and Paris and Vienna and Naples. Amschel had no children. He was the keeper of the original house. He died in 1855. And whatever was in that room died with him, in the sense that no living person by 1898 knew what was inside. The workers were brought in from Mainz. The wall was opened over 3 nights between the 11th and the 13th of October. Pauli was present. Wilhelm Karl was present. A 4th man, identified in Pauli's papers only as a representative of the Vienna house, was present. No one else was admitted until everything had been documented, packed, and removed. The map came out first. It was the largest single object in the room. Folded into 32 sections. Wrapped in oiled linen. When it was unfolded in a private warehouse outside Frankfurt, it measured approximately 4 meters by 3 meters. It was drawn on a single piece of vellum. A single piece. Which was itself an impossibility, because no animal on Earth produces a hide that large. The vellum was old. Not 18th century old. Older than that, in a way that Pauly, who had handled historical documents in his architectural work, noted in his diary made the material feel wrong in his hands. Too smooth. Too even. Too consistent for any tanning process he recognized. The map showed the northern hemisphere. Specifically the territory that modern atlases label Russia, Siberia, Mongolia, and Central Asia. A single word was inscribed across the center of that territory in Latin script. Tartaria. Beneath it, in smaller letters, were the names of cities. Some of them are still on modern maps. Most of them are not. The map was dated in the lower right corner to the year 1737. The cartographer was identified as Guillaume Delisle, working for the French Academy of Sciences. Now here is where this story stops being strange and starts being something else. Guillaume Delisle was real. He existed. He produced maps of Tartaria for the French crown in the early 18th century. His maps are held in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. They have been digitized. They are freely viewable today. Anyone can look at them. The map found in the Frankfurt vault was not a copy of any Delisle map currently in the public record. It contained detail that the public maps do not contain. It marked roads where the public maps marked nothing. It identified 5 cities along the upper Yenisei River that, according to every modern history textbook, did not exist. And those 5 cities had names. Camberlic, on the Selenga. Kristina, on the Tom. Serpanov, on the Ob Tarta, on the Irtish. Toima, on the upper Yenisei. These names were not invented by a forger in 1898. They appear in sources older than the Rothschilds. They appear in the writings of Marco Polo. They appear in the cosmographies of Sebastian Münster. They appear in the atlases of Mercator and Ortelius. They appear repeatedly in the official cartography of the 17th and 18th centuries, marked as real, populated, functioning cities. And then, sometime between roughly 1780 and 1820, they vanish from every map ever published. Not described as destroyed. Not marked as abandoned. Simply gone. The territory relabeled. The word Tartaria removed. The cities replaced with blank space or the word steppes or the phrase territory unknown. The map in the Frankfurt vault showed those cities not as ruins but as functioning urban centers. It showed roads connecting them. River crossings. What appeared to be canal networks running between the settlements. It showed, in other words, a civilization that the official record now insists never existed in that form. The iron chest was opened on the 14th of October. It contained 11 leather-bound ledgers, a sheaf of architectural drawings rolled inside a copper tube, a small wooden box of correspondence sealed with the wax marks of 3 different European houses, and an object described in the inventory that Pauly was required to sign only as a cylindrical device of unknown function, approximately the length of a man's forearm, weighing roughly 7 kilograms, made of a material that appeared to be brass but was unusually heavy. The ledgers first. They were account books covering the years 1798 to 1836. They recorded transactions in coin and bullion between the Frankfurt house and a series of correspondents whose names the ledger clerks had written in a mixture of Latin transliteration and a script that none of the men present in the warehouse could identify. The Vienna representative spoke 6 languages and read 4 more. He could not identify the script. Pauly later wrote that it resembled in general shape the inscriptions he had seen on certain old church bells in the eastern provinces of the Austrian Empire, but he could not read it. The sums recorded in those ledgers were not small. Converted into the gold standard of 1898 they ran into the tens of millions of marks. And the goods being exchanged were not ordinary trade goods. Some of the entries were mundane. Furs, salt, timber, iron. Others were not. There were entries for electrum, the natural alloy of gold and silver, in quantities no European mint of that period could have absorbed without comment. There were entries for a substance the clerk had recorded as orichalcum, which is the name Plato used for the legendary metal of Atlantis, and which no modern chemist has ever produced or identified. There were entries for cut stones of a size and weight that would have required for transport equipment that does not appear on any known logistics record of any European company of that era. Whatever the Rothschild Frankfurt house had been trading between 1798 and 1836, it was not what their public ledgers recorded. Now the architectural drawings. These were the part of the discovery that the Vienna representative reportedly stood over the longest without speaking. The drawings showed buildings. Some in plan and elevation. Others in cross-section. The buildings were not European. They were not Asian in any conventional sense. They had the angular precision of fortifications, but their function was not military. The walls were too thin. The windows were positioned at heights and angles that made no defensive sense. The towers were tall and slender and topped with what the marginal notes on the drawings described, in careful technical script, as antennae of fine copper wire. Antennae. In 1798. Half a century before Maxwell published his equations on electromagnetism. 3/4 of a century before Hertz demonstrated radio waves in a laboratory. A full century before Marconi sent a signal across the English Channel. The drawings in that copper tube, dated by the paper and the ink and the style of the handwriting to the late 18th century, contained engineering specifications for structures apparently designed to receive or transmit electrical signals through the air. And the structures themselves had a shape that anyone who has spent time with the suppressed history of Central Asia will recognize immediately. They were star forts. 8-pointed and 12-pointed bastion designs, the same geometry that appears in the old city walls of European military architecture from Lille to Palmanova. But these star forts were not in Europe. The marginal labels gave their locations. One on the lower Volga. One on the upper Yenisei. One on a peninsula in the White Sea. One on an island in what is now the Sea of Okhotsk. The interior of Siberia. The shores of the Arctic Ocean. The high deserts of Central Asia. And at the center of each star, in each drawing, was the same feature. A tall narrow tower topped with the copper wire array. The earthworks described as a ground plane. The moats lined with a mineral-rich clay described in the notes as a dielectric layer. The drawings described, in the technical vocabulary of late 18th century engineering, a machine for collecting electrical potential from the atmosphere itself. A network of machines, spread across Eurasia from the Carpathians to the Pacific, each one drawing power from the natural electrical gradient that exists between the surface of the Earth and the ionosphere above it. In 1898, the year those drawings were opened, Nikola Tesla was working in Colorado Springs on exactly this principle. He believed the Earth was a giant electrical reservoir. He was building a tower at Wardenclyffe on Long Island that he claimed would draw energy from the atmosphere and transmit it wirelessly anywhere in the world. Tesla's project was funded initially by J.P. Morgan. It was abandoned in 1903. The tower was demolished in 1917. The papers documenting its operation have never been located. The Frankfurt drawings predated Tesla by a century. And they did not show one tower. They showed a network of towers covering an entire continent. The correspondence in the small wooden box was the last thing opened in that warehouse, and the part that Pauli spent the most time describing in his private papers. 31 letters in total. Addressed to Amschel Mayer in Frankfurt. Dated between 1815 and 1834. Written from correspondence in St. Petersburg, in Constantinople, in Bombay, in Bokhara, and in a city the letters called Karakoram, which according to standard history had been a ruin since the 14th century. The letters in plain language discussed the closure of accounts. The settling of obligations. They referred repeatedly to what the writers called the Great Winding Down. One letter dated October 1821, signed only with the initial K, contained a phrase that Pauli copied into his diary that same night. Translated from the French it read as follows. The old houses are coming down. The new world has no use for our records. Burn what you must. Bury what you cannot burn. The letters described in fragmentary terms the collapse of something that was not a war and not a revolution. It was described as a withdrawal. Cities being abandoned in a controlled sequence. Records being destroyed on a schedule. Populations being relocated under new names. The word Tartaria appeared in the letters twice, and both times it had been crossed out by the original writer and replaced with other terms. Russia in some instances. Empire of the Steppes in others. The territory of the Prince of Tobolsk in one. Someone was erasing a civilization in real time. And writing to the Frankfurt Rothschilds about it. The cylindrical device was the last object examined. 42 centimeters in length. 6 centimeters in diameter. No visible seams. No markings except for a series of fine helical grooves running its full length. It weighed slightly under 7 kilograms, which was impossible for an object that size made of ordinary brass. Brass of that volume should weigh approximately 3 kilograms. The cylinder weighed more than twice what it should. When it was placed on the wooden table in the center of the warehouse, the compass in the Vienna representative's coat pocket deflected sharply toward it. When the cylinder was moved to the far end of the warehouse, the compass returned to magnetic north. The object possessed a strong and stable magnetic field. No one present could explain what it was, how it had been made, or what it was for. It was packed in straw and removed from the warehouse on the night of the 18th of October. Polly never saw it again. The two workers who had broken through the wall, the ones who signed the affidavit before the notary, were named Heinrich Bachmann and Otto Vogel. Bachmann was found dead in his lodgings in February 1899. Heart failure. He was 34 years old. Vogel was found drowned in the Main River in October of the same year. The cause of death was recorded as accidental. He could not swim. The third worker, named only as Karl in Polly's papers, returned to Mainz and refused to discuss what he had seen with any researcher who subsequently tracked him down. He died of natural causes in 1937 at the age of 76. The notary who took the affidavit, a man named Eduard Hirsch, retired from practice in 1903 and emigrated to Switzerland. His office records, which Prussian law required to be deposited with the Frankfurt Municipal Archive on retirement, were destroyed in a fire in 1908. The fire was confined to a single storage room. The damage, the fire report noted, was suspiciously precise. Wilhelm Karl died on the 25th of January 1901. The Frankfurt house formally closed the same year. The building on Bornheimer Landstrasse was sold, heavily damaged in the Second World War, the rubble cleared, the site redeveloped. There is today no plaque, no marker, no public record of any kind indicating that anything unusual was ever found at that address. Polly the architect lived until 1924. He published 2 short pamphlets on Frankfurt architecture in his later years. Neither mentions the vault. But in his private papers, held until the 1990s in the archive of a technical institute in Darmstadt, he left an unsigned typescript of approximately 60 pages describing the events of October 1898 in complete detail. That typescript was reproduced partially in a German-language historical journal in 1997. It entered the stream of suppressed history research and has remained there in fragments ever since. The 47 crates were divided and transported in stages. Some by river barge through Rotterdam. Some by rail to Vienna. Some reportedly to a private estate in northern Italy. The map went to a destination that none of Polly's papers identify. The ledgers and the correspondence were divided among 3 of the 4 surviving branches of the family. The cylindrical device, according to a single line in a letter Polly wrote to his cousin in 1903, went to London. Where in London, he did not say. Whether it is still there, in what condition, in whose possession, none of the surviving documents suggest. The iron chest that contained everything was left in the warehouse. It was still there when Polly visited the warehouse for the last time in the spring of 1899. After that, the warehouse changed hands. The new owners, when contacted by a researcher in the early 20th century, said they had found the warehouse empty on the day they took possession. The chest was gone. 47 crates, an iron chest, a map that showed a civilization that official history says never existed, account books recording transactions in metals that do not exist, architectural drawings for technology that should not have been possible, 31 letters describing the controlled erasure of an entire world, and a brass cylinder that weighed twice what it should and deflected every compass in the room. All of it removed. All of it distributed. All of it placed beyond the reach of any archive, any researcher, any public record that has ever been made accessible. The building gone. The workers dead. The notary emigrated. The records burned. The chest disappeared. The typescript unsigned. The map unlocated. The silence around the Frankfurt vault of 1898 is not the silence of nothing happening. It is the silence of something happening that was too large to survive. And somewhere in the city of London, in a private collection that no researcher has ever been granted access to, a brass cylinder that weighs twice what it should is sitting in a room that is not on any architectural drawing of the building that contains it. Waiting for someone to ask the right question.